Okay? Well, for your information, Aberdeen is located about 100 miles southwest of here on the way to the ocean. Now, Aberdeen used to be known for only two things: the amount of taverns it had and the amount of whorehouses it had. But in Aberdeen lived a young family who had a small son, who by age 5 was already playing the drums. And by age 12, he was very good on the guitar. And he was getting in and entertaining all of those customers in all those taverns down in Aberdeen. Now, eventually, his notoriety spread up here to Seattle and then, of course, around the world. And in case you don't know who I'm talking about Kurt Cobain, who started the band Nirvana.
Em 1994, Kurt Cobain era o maior astro de rock do mundo, o líder de um movimento chamado grunge. No dia 5 de abril, na casa dele, ele deu um tiro na boca.
Kurt Cobain went to his Sub-Zero refrigerator, grabbed a Barq's root beer, grabbed it in his hand, walked 30 paces, walked into his greenhouse, drank the root beer, injected himself with heroin, and shot himself. What motivated him to get into that point, of course, is the great mystery.
Uns dias antes do suicídio, o Kurt desapareceu. A gente foi para Aberdeen e para a cidade que ficou famosa por causa dele, Seattle, para reconstituir os últimos momentos da vida dele. Essa é a história dos últimos dias de Kurt Cobain e do que acontece quando um cara consegue o que quer. De 1994. Às 8h45, Kurt Cobain deixou a mansão dele no bairro de Lake Washington, em Seattle, e seguiu para uma região aonde os ricos e famosos nunca vão. Às 9h45, ele entrou na Stan Baker Sports, no número 1000 da Lake City Way, e comprou uma arma. E era com ela que ele ia se matar. Um pouco antes de comprar essa arma, o Kurt tinha concordado em se internar para tratar do vício de heroína. Ele só falava desse vício no diário dele.
The hair on the back of my neck is standing up, but particularly when you start reading stuff about his pleas to God to help him with his addiction, where he's literally writing, "Please God, I will do anything. I will trade anything to let go of this addiction."
Na tarde do dia 30 de março, Harvey Ottinger levou Kurt para o aeroporto para ele ir para a clínica Exodus, em Los Angeles. O Harvey já tinha levado Kurt para o aeroporto várias vezes, mas dessa vez era diferente.
Really, very little conversation took place between the drive to the airport, but I got to the airport and pulled up, and he just looked at me and said, "Oh, F," you know, and proceeded to tell me that he had just bought a shotgun and a box of shells this morning, and that he still had the box of 20-gauge shotgun shells in his carry-on bag, and of course he couldn't take those into the airport, and he gave them to me and asked for me to return them to the house. He was quite adamant and mentioned several times that he wanted those returned.
Did you not think that was a bit unusual?
Well, that he had gave me this box? Oh yeah, I was surprised. I told a few people during the week, but nobody thought anything of it. This is the Wild West here.
Quando Kurt saiu de Seattle naquela quinta-feira à noite, aconteceram várias coisas que iam terminar na descoberta do corpo dele uma semana depois.
Well, there's some crazy things in those last few days. There are people that are literally missing Kurt by inches. You know, it's almost a Keystone Cops comedy if it didn't end in such a tragedy. But could any of them saved his life if they would have seen him? And maybe they could have tied him down and locked him up, and maybe he would have gotten better. But again, it almost again goes to a spiritual question where you say, what was this man's fate?
I was born in Aberdeen, Washington, I had a really good childhood until my parents divorced. I was ashamed of my parents. I couldn't face some of my friends at school. I desperately wanted to have, typical family. I wanted that security. And all of a sudden, the whole world changed. I became antisocial. I started to understand the reality of my surroundings, which didn't have a lot to offer.
Aberdeen é uma cidade que produz madeira no estado de Washington, na região noroeste dos Estados Unidos. A cidade mais próxima é Seattle, a 160 quilômetros de distância.
Every store you would go into would have the TV on really loud and somebody would be sitting there smoking, like there'd be smoke hanging in the air, and it would always be raining. Like I went to Aberdeen for 10 years before I ever went there when it wasn't raining. And you'd always witness some kind of domestic violence. You have to leave to do anything with yourself. If you stay there, you get sucked into the whole malaise of the place.
And Leyland, what sort of place is Aberdeen?
What sort of place is Aberdeen? If you live up on the hill, you're it. If you live over on the south side or down on the flats, you're crap.
O Kurt não morava mesmo na parte de cima. Os pais dele se separaram quando ele tinha 7 anos e, com uma vida familiar infeliz, ele ia se esconder no trailer dos avós. Ele também disse que dormia debaixo dessa ponte, que virou um lugar de adoração a Kurt Cobain, depois que apareceu numa de suas músicas.
That sense of Kurt being homeless, I think he overstated. He told people he lived under a bridge. According to everyone I could talk to in Aberdeen, he never lived under the bridge. He was a whiny, wimpy guy, and it was cold in Aberdeen. But he did live in squats and in abandoned houses, and in probably, I think, the single most heartbreaking story, he would occasionally go into the hospital he was born in and sleep in the waiting room. And his concept with that was that people would think he was waiting for an injured relative, and no one would dare approach a guy in a hospital waiting room and say, "Get out."
Às 7h55 da noite, o Kurt chegou nesse hospital de Los Angeles para começar um tratamento de 28 dias. O terapeuta dele era o Niall Stimpson. Essa é a primeira vez que o Niall fala do tempo em que eles passaram juntos.
Exodus is, or was at that time, a rehabilitation program for people having drug and alcohol problems. And it's where a lot of rock stars have gone through recovery themselves, and now they support each other and they stay sober. And they have a network where they have special meetings and they all go to, and which actually really works really well for those that want to participate. But I had the feeling that he didn't really want anything to do with that type of scene. He didn't want to hear about recovery really very much at all. I mean, I don't believe that, in my opinion, he was even really ready to look at his addiction as being an issue. And the last thing he wanted to do was be preached by all these rock gods that had been there, done it.
Nos diários, ele dizia que implorava para Deus, que faria qualquer coisa para se livrar do vício. Mas o terapeuta diz que era exatamente o contrário.
I get the feeling he didn't think that he was a junkie and that he had a legitimate reason and he was somewhat different.
Se você estava lá, vai ver de novo.